Allah is the one, the one, the one, the one, the one.
Brothers and sisters, I know it's cold, right? The voice can't come out. Jazakallah khair, first of all, for coming and to be in this gathering. I'm Brother Adil Malik, for those who don't know, part of Muslim Council of Hong Kong. First of all, we would like to thank the Shaykh Ahsan Hanif to come to us in Hong Kong City from all the way from the UK, Birmingham. And second of all, we would like to thank Serving Islam team to allow us to hold this lecture here. And above all, thanks to all of you to come here as well, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. So those who don't know, we'll be having this program. Today's the first one. 8 o'clock tonight, we'll be in Kowloon Masjid, inshallah. And then tomorrow we have it in the MCHK Center in Chim Cha Choi. And then Mondays in PolyU, inshallah. So it's an intensive program. And hopefully we can just try to get the best out of it as much as we can, inshallah. So just to give a quick intro to Shaykh Ahsan Hanif. He is the Imam of Green Lane Masjid in Birmingham. He graduated from Islamic University of Medina, and he's a very close. He likes to give circles, especially in the Quran, alhamdulillah. And he studied under a lot of famous scholars from Medina University as well. He's one of the youngest instructors actually in Al Maghrib Institute as well. He's one of the instructors as well. I'm trying to remember his bio. And he is also, he studied Islamic law as well, alhamdulillah. He did PhD in Islamic law as well at the University of Birmingham. So, alhamdulillah, we have him here, and I'll pass it to him now. Jazakallah khair.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm very strong.
Yeah.
Also suffering from the cold. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala wa sallama tasliman kathira amma ba'd. Our lecture this morning or this afternoon is entitled Everyone Can Become a Caller to Islam. And what I want to begin with is, as Brother Adil mentioned, one of my passions, and I think a passion that all of us share, is the study of the Quran and tafsir and learning about the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of the things that I am most amazed about when it comes to the Quran is the story of the beginning of the Quran, how it all began. Because if we think of the Quran, we normally think of 114 surahs, we think of thousands of verses, we think of so many things. But one of the things that we fail to spend a lot of time and effort thinking about and focusing on and contemplating over is, where did the journey of the Quran begin? Because the journey of the Quran in its beginning is also the beginning of the journey of the Prophet ﷺ. And it is also the beginning of the journey of Islam. Our religion began with a single verse of the Quran that was revealed. That's where everything began. It began with the verse of the Quran being revealed, as we know, in the cave of Hira. Now the Quran contains many verses, contains many commandments, contains many instructions. And from all of those thousands of verses that Allah Azza wa Jal revealed in the Quran, which verse did He begin with in the Quran? What was the first verse that Allah revealed in the Quran? You can tell me. Iqra, right? The famous verse, read in the name of your Lord. Read. So Allah Azza wa Jal didn't start Islam by telling us to pray, even though we know how important Salah is. He didn't start Islam by telling us, for example, that we need to give zakah and give charity. He didn't start Islam by telling us to go and make hajj, to go to Mecca, or that we need to fast in Ramadan, or that we need to be good to our parents, or that we need to be respectful to our neighbors. All of these many things that comprise Islam, and that the Quran would then later on mention as well. Islam didn't begin with any of this. It began with a single commandment to read. Now if you think about this, why is it so important to read? Well, the Arabs during that time, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, for the vast majority, they were illiterate. They were unread. They were uneducated. Yes, there were from amongst them those who were read and had learned to read and write and could understand and were cultured and educated. But the vast majority of them were the opposite. Even our own Prophet ﷺ. Allah describes him in the Quran as an Nabiyul Ummi, the illiterate, unlettered Prophet. meaning he couldn't read and he couldn't write. And that's what became one of his miracles, the fact that he couldn't read and write, yet still he was able to relate this Quran. So the Arabs generally were an illiterate people. But because of their illiteracy, because they were not educated, what were the problems that came about? Because if you think about it, they were living in Mecca, which as we know is the holiest place in all of the planet. They had by them the Kaaba, which is the holiest of all of Allah Azza wa Jal's mosques. They had by them the well of Zamzam, which has, as we know, the holiest of water. So they had all of this within their midst. They were descendants of the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, who is one of the greatest prophets that Allah ever sent to mankind. They had so much culture and history and tradition within themselves as Meccans. The Kaaba, Ibrahim alayhi salam, Ismail alayhi salam, even Hajj, the concept of Hajj as we know, Safa and Marwa, all of this existed in some form before Islam. They had all of it. What was the problem therefore? Why did they go into shirk? Why was the Kaaba surrounded by 360 idols? Why would they worship other than Allah? Why would they themselves make idols from food out of dates and barley and wheat? And they would worship that idol that they molded out of food with their own hands. And then in a month's time, when they had famine and drought, and they had nothing to eat, they would go back to that God that they molded and eat it instead, because they were so hungry. But that still wouldn't make them think about how foolish it was for them to worship anyone besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Where did it all go wrong? From that prestigious history, from that tradition, from the starting with Ibrahim alayhi salam, now we have a group of people who would make tawaf naked, as we know. They would run between the mountains of Safa and Marwa because there were one idol on one of them and another idol on the other. And all of these other practices that they had. They would bury their daughters alive, as we know, some of them. Bury them alive because of how much shame it brought to them in their community. Where did it all go wrong? It went wrong with the first commandment that Allah then tried to rectify it with in the Quran. Iqra, read. Because they lost knowledge. They lost education. They lost that ability to understand. And because they were no longer reading and gaining knowledge, what takes place when there is no knowledge? Ignorance. So that gap, that vacuum that was built, it was replaced with ignorance. And so Shaitan, Iblis, was easily able to come to them and tell them to do this and to do that, to worship other than Allah, to build these idols, to make these idols, to make these gods that they were worshipping besides Allah Azza wa Jal. And so from that beautiful history of Ibrahim and Ismail alayhim salam, now we have a group of people, a community, a society that does all of this wrong and all of this shirk. So Allah Azza wa Jal began with a single simple commandment. It is one of the easiest, most beautiful words in the Arabic language. Iqra, read. Seek knowledge. Learn. Read. And so they started to educate themselves. The companions of the Prophet ﷺ, the companions, the Muslims, they would learn and they would read. So from the very beginning of Islam, as soon as that commandment was revealed, for the next 23 years of the prophethood of our Prophet ﷺ, the rest of his life, he dedicated himself to being a caller to Allah, to teaching, to educating. And the companions dedicated their lives to being students. And so they changed what they had, they changed the norms of their society and realized that many of them can't read and write. It's not that they all of a sudden start going to school and learning how to read and write. That's not just the only meaning of education. It is about learning. It is about that pursuit of knowledge. It is about wanting to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through studying the Quran and studying the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's a famous scholar in Islam. His name is Abdullah ibn Mubarak, rahimahullah. Very famous scholar of hadith. Lived well over 1,000 years ago. And he lived in the part of the world that today is in modern day Afghanistan and this part of the region of the world. He lived there and he was a great scholar of hadith, memorized thousands and thousands of hadith, is considered to be one of the teachers of Imam Bukhari and so on and so forth. Abdullah ibn Mubarak. Abdullah ibn Mubarak was also a very wealthy man. He was a scholar, but he was very wealthy, extremely rich. And one day someone came to him and he said to him, "Oh Abdullah, if you only had one day left to live, one day left, and you knew you would die after this day, what would you spend this day doing? How would you spend your last day on earth? And he said, I would spend it teaching people. I would spend it teaching people their religion. And that shows you how important it is to understand our religion and to learn. He didn't say I would spend it praying, fasting, giving charity and so on. He said I will spend it teaching others. Why? Because that's what the Prophet ﷺ did. Yes, he prayed, and we know he prayed, and we know he gave charity, and we know he did so many other things. But the thing that was most consistent in his life, from the beginning of Islam until the end, is teaching in all different ways and shapes and forms. And it wasn't just teaching verbally. Because when it came to the companions, when it came to the Muslims, he would teach them. But the Prophet ﷺ, for those of you, and I'm sure all of us have studied some seerah, we've studied some history and so on. The Prophet ﷺ never said to the companions that today we're going to study fiqh, tomorrow we're going to study Quran, the next day we're going to study seerah. He never had a schedule or a timetable. There was no such thing as even these subjects, these names and subjects didn't exist in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. They would develop later. So how did the Prophet ﷺ teach? He taught through his manners, and through his character, and through his dealing, and through interacting with people. And when he saw that there were mistakes, he would correct them. And when he saw that people needed advice, he would advise them. And when people would come to him, he would teach them in the way that was most befitting to them. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ would deal with people on an individual basis. One person, he needs something more than something else. Someone else requires emphasis on a different issue. The Prophet ﷺ would deal with each person as he saw was befitting. There is a companion who came by the name of Damam ibn Tha'laba. This hadith is in Bukhari and another Bukhari. He came to him and he was an ambassador from his tribe, from outside of Mecca. And he came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said to him, and he was an extremely intelligent man. He said, "Oh Muhammad," he wasn't a Muslim, he came and he said, "Oh Muhammad, I am going to ask you questions about your religion and I'm going to be strict. So don't be upset." This is how he started his conversation with the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ said to him, "Okay, ask you questions." He said to him, "I ask you by Allah, by the one who created you and those who came before you and the Lord of everything, did he send you as his prophet?" And he said, "Yes." And then he asked him a series of questions. Did Allah tell you to pray 5 times a day? Did Allah tell you that we have to give charity? Did Allah tell you that we have to make Hajj, the fast Ramadan, and so on and so forth? And the Prophet ﷺ kept saying to him, "Yes, yes, yes." At the end, he said to him, "Therefore, I will leave you. I will go back to my people." He doesn't live in Mecca or Medina. He doesn't live there. He's not going to study. He's not going to learn. He's taken the basic 5 pillars of Islam. He said, "I will go back to my people. And I won't do more than what you told me, and I won't do less. I will do exactly what you said. I will do everything that you said, and I will go back to my people, and I will call them to what you just said." And then he left. The Prophet ﷺ said, if he is truthful, he will be successful. So he went back to his people. All he knows about Islam are the 5 pillars. Every Muslim, every single one of us, every Muslim, 7, 8, 9 years old, the first thing or one of the first things that we learn is the 5 pillars of Islam. That's all he learned. That's all he took. He went back to his people, to his tribe, and he called them to those 5 pillars. And all of this tribe accepted Islam. All of them. This isn't a man who studied, who spent, it's not like Abu Bakr or Umar or Uthman or Ali. He didn't spend years in the companionship of the Prophet ﷺ, didn't spend years learning and studying and praying and worshipping. He just took what he could and he went back and he taught with it. Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, as we know, one of the famous companions, he said that this man, Damam ibn Tha'laba, he was one of the most successful people who ever came to visit the Prophet ﷺ. Just came, a single encounter, learned his religion, took what he needed to know, and he went back and he called others to it. And that's what the Prophet ﷺ says to all of us. بَلِّغُوا عَنِّي وَلَوْ آيَةً. Convey from me even if it is a single verse. You don't need to be a scholar of Islam. in order for you to call and influence others that they need to follow this religion. What you need to do though is to be a model. You need to be an ambassador. An ambassador in the way that you are, in your manners, in your principles, in the way, everything that you do. You see, the Quraysh, before the Prophet ﷺ was given revelation, as we know, they used to call him the truthful, the trustworthy. They used to honor him, they used to respect him, they used to love him. Why? Because of his character. So when Allah Azza wa Jal gave him Islam, when he was sent as a prophet of Allah, none of them were able to say anything bad about the Prophet ﷺ, because they already knew his character. They already knew his mannerisms. They already knew his personality. So the Prophet ﷺ, one of the greatest ways that he called people to Islam was because he was a man of principle. He had principles. And this is something that we as Muslims first and foremost should adopt. We need to be a people who have principles. We stick up for what is right. And we help what is wrong. See, when the Prophet ﷺ receives that first revelation, going back again to that story of Iqra, what does he do after he receives revelation? Who does he go back to? Khadija, radiallahu anha, his wife. And he tells her, this is what's happened and I don't know what's going on. And he's afraid and he's upset and so on. What does Khadija radiallahu anha say to him? She says, don't worry. Allah will never forsake you. Allah will never leave you. And then what reasons does she give? She doesn't know the truthfulness of this message. She doesn't know what an angel is. She doesn't know revelation. This is something new for everyone. The Prophet ﷺ himself doesn't understand. How can Khadija radiallahu anha understand? But what she is saying to him, that Allah will never leave you. Why? Because of his principle. You look after the poor. You're hospitable to the guest. You're a person who stands up for the oppressed. It is because of these principles, it is because of your mannerisms, that is why Allah Azza wa Jal will never leave you. And that's why it's so important. We need to be people who have principles. The Prophet ﷺ in the Hijrah, when he migrated, he left Mecca to Medina. He left Mecca because they were going to assassinate him. Right? They wanted to take his life, they wanted to kill him. So the Prophet ﷺ decides in the middle of the night that he will leave with Abu Bakr and he will flee. He will run away. Who does he leave in his place? Who's sleeping in his bed? Ali radiallahu anhu. And what is Ali's instructions? Ali is told to stay behind in Mecca after the vast majority of Muslims have left. Remember now, the vast majority of Muslims have already migrated to Medina. Very few, if any, Muslims are left behind. Ali is one of the youngest companions. And is told to stay back. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ had taken loans. He had borrowed things. He had trust that people gave to him. And he said, you must stay behind and fulfill all of these trusts. Pay back my loans. And then you may come to Medina. Now, a person maybe would ask the question, why? He's fleeing for his life. He's afraid that he's going to be killed. These people are oppressing him. They're trying to assassinate him. Why spend time worrying about their possessions and their wealth and their money and their loans and so on? It is because it is an issue of principle. It is an issue of right and wrong, of justice and oppression. So the Prophet ﷺ was a person of principle. What was right was right. And so the Prophet ﷺ tells Ali radiallahu anhu to fulfill all of his trusts. Many years later, on another occasion, this time on the conquest of Mecca, when the Prophet ﷺ returns with the Muslim army and they conquer the city of Mecca. The Prophet ﷺ asked to go into the Kaaba to pray. So he wanted the key to open the door of the Kaaba, go inside that cube-shaped building to pray inside the Kaaba itself. The person who held the key, his name was Uthman ibn Abi Talha. Uthman ibn Abi Talha, his family for many, many generations always had the key in Quraysh to the door of the Kaaba. If someone wanted to go in, you had to knock on his door and say, please come and open the door for me. And he would come and open the door. Now when the Prophet ﷺ was living in Mecca, all of the Quraysh could go into the Kaaba and pray. They had their idols and so on in there, they would go and pray. The Prophet ﷺ said to Uthman one day, I want to go and pray. He refused, he said no, because he's a Muslim. No, For you, I will never open the Kaaba. The Prophet ﷺ said, you don't refuse anyone. Everyone's allowed to go in. Anyone from Quraysh can go in. I am also from Quraysh. I want to go in. And previously you used to let me in. He said, no. From now on, you're not allowed. So the Prophet said to him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, perhaps a day will come when I will have the keys in my hand. And I will do with it whatever I wish. So he said, and that will be a day that I will have lost. Meaning Quraysh, we will have lost. He said, rather that will be a day when Quraysh will be honored. This is something which happened at the beginning of Islam. Many years passed by. The Prophet ﷺ conquers Mecca. He returns and he says to Uthman, come and give me the key. Uthman doesn't have a choice now, right? Can't say no, can't refuse, doesn't have a choice. He goes and he gives him the key. Al-Abbas, who's Abbas? The uncle of the Prophet ﷺ. He said, O Messenger of Allah, give me the keys. Give it to me. I want to be the doorkeeper. Right? It's an honor to hold the keys and be in charge of the Kaaba. Give it to me. And he is the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ said, where is Uthman? Call the same man Uthman. And he said to him, don't you remember what I said to you many years ago when you refused to let me in? And I said, perhaps a day will come when I will have the keys and I will do with them as I please. So Uthman at the time wasn't a Muslim. He said, yes, I remember what took place and I remember your words. So then the Prophet ﷺ gave him back the keys. And he said, keep it for you and for your children after you. No one will take these keys from you except an oppressor. No one will remove the keys from you. It is for you and your family. Until today, 1400 years later, if you go now to Saudi Arabia in Mecca, the people who have the keys are from that same family. They are from the descendants of this man, Uthman ibn Abi Talha, from his children. Till today, the eldest of the tribe of the family, he holds the key. If the king of Saudi Arabia wants to go in, he must ask for him to come and open the door first. He has the keys. And the Prophet ﷺ said, no one will take this away from you except an oppressor. So the Prophet ﷺ was known for his principles. He was known to have these morals and these ethics. And so when the people would come, the Prophet ﷺ would have these principles. The way that he was, the way that he spoke, the justice that he had, everyone knew this. And because of this, the Prophet ﷺ would affect people not only by his words, but also by his principles. And then the Prophet ﷺ had character as well. His good mannerisms, his personality, the way that he was with people. The Prophet ﷺ, as we know, had amazing character, even with his enemies, even with those people who wanted to do him harm. One day as the Prophet ﷺ was resting, and he was under the shade of a tree. He'd hanged his sword up on the branches of the tree, and he was resting. So a man came from his enemies, and he took out the sword, and he held it to the neck of the Prophet ﷺ. And he said to him, who will now protect you from me? Who can protect you from me? I have the sword, you're asleep, you're defenseless, you're alone. Who will help you? And the Prophet ﷺ responded, Allah. Allah will help you. So the man was so overcome by his words that he dropped the sword. The Prophet ﷺ picked it up and he held it now to this man and he said, now who will protect you from me? And the man said to him, be a person who is kind and gracious to the one that is being overpowered. So the Prophet ﷺ let him go. He said, go. On another occasion, as we know, the Bedouins would come from the desert of Arabia, and they would come and they would say, oh Muhammad, give us from wealth, give us money. So the Prophet ﷺ would say to them, go to the valley between the two mountains, and all of the livestock, the sheep, the cows, the camels, all of the livestock that you see, take it all. So the Prophet ﷺ would give them all of this wealth. Doesn't know how much it is, wouldn't count it, all of it's for you. So the Prophet ﷺ would give them so much wealth that these Bedouins would go back to their tribes in the desert and they would say, we've just come from a man who doesn't fear poverty, doesn't care about money, just gives and gives and gives and doesn't care. And so the Prophet ﷺ would do this in a way that people would love his character. They loved him for his personality. They loved him for his mannerisms. And that's why when the Prophet ﷺ, after the battle of Tabuk and after these battles, after the conquest of Mecca, the Prophet ﷺ distributed the wealth amongst all of the new Muslims. the people of Mecca, the people of Taif, all of these people who are now Muslims, he gave them all of this wealth, gave them so much money. And the people of Medina, who had been Muslims for many, many years, for a very long time, who had fought and been patient and strived, he didn't give them anything. So they became upset. They became upset, right? We're the ones who helped him, we're the ones who strived, we're the ones who worked so hard, we don't get anything. These people only became Muslims yesterday, they only started yesterday, they only started helping now, and they take everything instead. So the Prophet ﷺ gathered the Ansar, the people of Medina, and he said to them, aren't you happy that everyone else should go back to their homes with money, with gold and silver and wealth and livestock, but you should go back home with the Prophet ﷺ? And they said, yes, we are happy, because he put it into perspective for them. They will take money, they will take gold, they will take silver, but only the people of Medina take home with them the Prophet ﷺ. And then the Prophet ﷺ said to them, by Allah, if all of the people in this world were traveling down one path, and the Ansar of Medina were to take a different path, I would take the path of the Ansar of Medina. If the whole world goes a different way, I will go with the people of Medina. And so because of this character, because of the way the Prophet ﷺ was, this is how much people loved him. There's a companion by the name of Jabir. Jabir is a famous companion. And he used to think to himself that there is no one that the Prophet ﷺ loves more than me. No one. Doesn't love anyone more than me. Why? Because every time he meets him, he smiles and he welcomes him, and he's so gracious and so kind and so beautiful. So he thinks there's no one that the Prophet ﷺ loves more than me. So one day he wants to prove this, right? He wants to show this. He wants to get confirmation. He says, O Messenger of Allah, who do you love most? Who do you love most? So the Prophet ﷺ replied, Aisha. My wife, Aisha. So he said, no, I don't mean from your wives and your family. Who do you love from the men? Right? From the men, who do you love? So the Prophet ﷺ replied, Abuha, her father, meaning Abu Bakr. So he thinks, okay, who after Abu Bakr, right? Abu Bakr is famous, is well known, he did so much. Who's next? He says, Umar. He says, okay, forget Umar, Abu Bakr. Who's after Umar? He says, Uthman. So then Jabir realizes now that he's not even towards the top of that list. But this is how important he feels to himself, because this is how the Prophet ﷺ's character was. He would treat people in such a way. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu said, one day I was so hungry. No one would feed me. Didn't have any money, was very poor, didn't have wealth, didn't have money, couldn't feed himself, couldn't find food. He was so hungry that he went to the companions and he started to talk to them, just a conversation in the hopes that one of them would say, come home with us and you can eat. Right? Just invite them home. He went to Abu Bakr, Umar, all of these companions, but none of them invited him home. So then when he went to the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ said, I could see in his face, or Abu Hurairah says, the Prophet ﷺ saw in my face hunger. And he said to me, oh Abu Hurairah, come home with me. No one else understands, no one else picks up these signs. Abu Hurairah doesn't want to beg, doesn't want to say, take me home. But the Prophet ﷺ understands. He takes him home. Says to his wife Aisha, what do we have? Aisha says, we have nothing except a bowl of milk. Someone gave us a bowl of milk, that's all that we have. Nothing else. Nothing to eat, nothing to drink, just a small bowl of milk. And the milk is meant for the Prophet ﷺ and his family. It's not meant for guests and people to come and share. It's only a small bowl of milk. The Prophet ﷺ takes the bowl of milk. He says, Bismillah, in the name of Allah. He gives it to Abu Hurairah. Abu Hurairah is really happy, he's excited. Finally, I get something. And he says, oh Abu Hurairah, take the milk and give it to the homeless first. Go to the homeless companions and give it to them. Abu Hurairah has been trying all night to find something to eat, something to drink, someone to take him home. Finally, he gets something and now he's told, go and give it to someone else. And he thinks it's a bowl of milk. There's 30, 40 homeless people. If only one of them drinks from it, it's finished. Right? There's no hope for me. But anyway, the Prophet said, take it, so he doesn't have a choice. He goes and he takes it. And the first one drinks, and the second one, and the third one, and the fourth one. Until all of them, 30, 40 drink, and there's still milk in them. So he comes back and he says, oh Messenger of Allah, they all drank, they all finished. He said, now you drink, Abu Hurairah. Abu Hurairah drank, and he only drank a little bit because he knows the Prophet ﷺ wants to drink, his family wants to drink, so he drank a little bit. He said, drink again, drink again, Abu Hurairah. He said, he kept telling me to drink until I drank so much, I said, I can't drink anymore. I'm full, I can't do anymore. And then the Prophet ﷺ took it and he drank from it. This was the character of the Prophet ﷺ. Every single time he met one person, he gave with him a special connection. They used to say about the Prophet ﷺ that if he came outside of his house and a young girl came and took him by his hand, she could take him anywhere she wanted and he would go. Wouldn't say to him, I'm busy, I've got a job, I have people who want to come to me, I have to go to the masjid, I have so many things to do. She could take him anywhere and he would just follow her. Just follow her. And he would do this because this is his character with the Prophet ﷺ. Anas ibn Malik served the Prophet ﷺ for 10 years. He was his servant. And he said, never once did he shout at me. And if I was ever playing with a group of friends, because he was a young boy, when I was playing with a group of friends and he needed something from me, he wouldn't call me, he would just stand by the side until I would see him, and then I would realize he needs me, and then I would go to him. Wouldn't disturb him from playing, wouldn't say anything. One time the Prophet ﷺ was walking down the street and a woman came to him and she had some health issues, some psychological illnesses. So she started to talk to him and talk, and she's not making any sense because she's ill, she's sick, but she's talking. And the Prophet ﷺ just stands there and he listens. Doesn't move, doesn't say anything, and she talks until she stops, and then she leaves, and then he leaves. So the Prophet ﷺ would have this special connection with everyone. Aisha radiallahu anha was asked, what did he do when he came home? What was he like in his home? She said that he would come and he would serve his family. He would mend his shoes, he would go and milk the goats, he would go, everything that we needed done at home, he would come and he would serve us. Even at home. And imagine, this is the Prophet ﷺ, he's got to deal with so many issues. Hundreds of issues. People trying to fight him, trying to kill him, trying to assassinate him, empires trying to take his land and so on. All of these issues. But the Prophet ﷺ still has time for all of these things. One day the Prophet ﷺ was giving the khutbah in the masjid on Friday, Jum'ah. And he's giving the khutbah and he's speaking. And in the middle of the khutbah, he sees his two grandsons, Al-Hassan and Hussein, walking to the masjid. Walking, they're very young, toddlers, walking in the masjid. And as young children do, they walk and they trip, they walk and they trip, they fall down. That's how they walk. And they were wearing long shirts, clothes that were too long for them. So they would trip up on their clothes and then they would stand up and trip up on their clothes. And the Prophet ﷺ is in the middle of the khutbah. And he sees this happen once, twice, 3 times. And then the Prophet ﷺ in the middle of the khutbah, he just stops, he gets down, he goes to them, he picks them up, he brings them back and makes them sit on his pulpit, on the minbar. And then he says to the companions that I saw my 2 grandsons walking and tripping, and my heart couldn't bear it. So I had to go and pick them up and bring them to me. Can you imagine that today, like the khatib does this in the middle of the Jum'ah, just walks off to go to see his children or a child? The whole community would have a revolt. But this is how the Prophet ﷺ was. The Prophet ﷺ would be praying in jama'ah. He would be leading the Muslims in the masjid, in jama'ah. And he would go into sajda and his granddaughter Umayma would come and she would jump on his back and she would play. She would ride him like a horse. And he wouldn't move. So one of the companions said that the sajda became so long that I thought something had gone wrong. So I lifted my eyes up from the place to see what's going on. Why has the Prophet not come out of sajda? And I saw a girl playing on his back and I went back down. Wouldn't disturb him. Even though we know that the Prophet ﷺ, when he's praying with the people, he makes the prayer short. Doesn't make it long, so it's difficult for people. But when his grandchildren are playing with him, he wants them to love Islam. He wants them to love the prayer, the salah. He wants them to love the masjid. See, unfortunately now, when we have young children in the masjid, we're told, take them home. Don't let them come in. Don't let them play. So from a young age, we're always saying, no, no, no. The Prophet ﷺ used to do the opposite. He used to let them come in and play and enjoy the masjid because this builds with them a connection to the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this was the amazing character of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Amazing in his character. And this is something which affected then those people that came and saw him. The people that spoke to him. The people that would come and they would want to learn about Islam. Or they would just simply come for whatever reason. they would take away from him his character and his mannerisms. The Prophet ﷺ would call people to Allah because of his trust. His word, he had trust. He had amana. If the Prophet ﷺ made a promise, he never broke it. If he took a trust, he would always fulfill that trust. If he said something, he meant what he said. And this is something which is unfortunate now, that many of us, when we speak, our words don't really hold weight. We say things, but then we break our promises. We'll say things, but no one knows whether to trust us or not, because our words don't hold value anymore. And it's not just us, this is the way the whole world has become. People talk and their words are just air. They don't mean anything. But rather the Prophet ﷺ, when he spoke, his words had meaning and they held weight. If he said something, he wouldn't just joke. He wouldn't just say something and he didn't mean it. He wouldn't just make a promise and then break the promise. But rather what he said, it is something that he meant. And it's something that he would fulfill as well. The Prophet ﷺ would call people to Allah because he knew about justice. He would call people to Allah through his sense of justice, through helping those people who are oppressed, to the extent that even his companions embodied this. His companions understood this. When Ali radiallahu anhu was the Khalifa of the Muslims, when he was the leader of the Muslims, a Jewish man once came and he made a complaint against Ali. What was the issue? Ali radiallahu anhu had some wealth that he gave to the Jewish man as a trust. He said, you look after this for me. The Jewish man claimed that it now belonged to him. They didn't want to give it back. So he came to Ali and he said, you don't get it back. What are you going to do? So Ali radiallahu anhu appointed a judge between him, and he's the leader of the Muslims. Doesn't need a judge if he doesn't want to. He can just do what he wants. But it's a sense of justice. So he appoints a judge. The judge says to Ali, where's your proof? Ali doesn't have any proof. There's no contract, there's no witnesses, doesn't have anything. Just his word against the other person's word. But the other person has the possessions in his hand. It's his, he can say, it's mine, right? It's in my possession. So the judge says to Ali, you don't have any proof, but this man already has this wealth in his hands. Therefore, I must judge for him and not for you. Ali radiallahu anhu smiled. The man said to him, why are you smiling? You lost, right? You lost, why are you smiling? I should be the one smiling. He said, I'm smiling because a judge will rule with justice even against the leader of the Muslims. Even against the leader of the Muslims, there will still be an issue of justice. And this is how the Prophet ﷺ trained his companions. Right? This is how the Prophet ﷺ used to tell people to behave. In his time when there was a crime that was committed, or if someone did something wrong, and then people came to intercede on their behalf, the Prophet ﷺ would say, no, don't intercede. Because that's when society becomes corrupt. When the strong intercede for the strong. When because people have nobility and they have honor, or people are rich and they're wealthy and they're famous, they're always let off the hook. And the poor and the needy are always the one who get the full measure of justice. Never works the other way around. The rich always get off and the poor are always taken to court. He said this is wrong. And I won't allow people to intercede for those people who are wealthy and rich just because they're wealthy and rich. So this is the sense of justice that the Prophet ﷺ had. But one of the things that makes it most amazing, how the Prophet ﷺ used to call people to Allah, and inshallah I will conclude with this final example, is that the Prophet ﷺ used to love good for everyone. He actually wanted people to come to Islam. He wanted them to learn. You know, sometimes when we call people to Islam, or when we advise people, or when someone's making a mistake and we try to correct them, we give them advice, and if they say no, we just say, okay, forget it then, right? And it becomes personal, and we begin to hate them, and we have animosity in our hearts towards them. The Prophet ﷺ, if you think about it, how many times was he tortured? How many times was he abused? How many times did they try to kill him? How many times was he physically harmed? But still within his heart, he always wanted good for others. Never took it personally. You can't call people to something if you don't want good for them, because it means you're not sincere. You don't really want them to have that good. If you call someone once and they say no to you, because that's what happens the vast majority of times when you call someone to something, when you invite someone, when you correct someone, when you advise someone, the odds are that they will often say no to you. But if you fall at that first hurdle, you stop, that means that you don't really want good for them. But if you carry on because you believe that your advice is good, that what you want them to do is good, it's better for them, it's in their best interests, then you will persevere and you will continue. Look at the incident of Taif. When the Prophet ﷺ came to the people of Taif, they didn't even listen to his words, wouldn't even allow him to utter a single word or to speak. Instead, they stoned him, they pelted him, blood flew from his body, and the Prophet ﷺ ran away. He fled from Taif. And only after he traveled and he walked for so many miles did he stop. And then Allah Azza wa Jal sent him the angel of the mountains. And the angel of the mountains said that I will destroy these people, crush them between the mountains of Mecca. And the Prophet ﷺ said no, because from them or from their children I hope will be those who will say La ilaha illallah. Didn't want justice for him, didn't want revenge for himself or retribution, wasn't about vengeance, wasn't about violence, it was because he wanted good for them. And then the Prophet ﷺ many years later, 10 odd years later, those same people of Taif, they would all come and accept Islam. Because he wanted good for them. He wanted them to come closer to Allah Azza wa Jal. Even the hypocrites in Medina, who caused so much harm and so much evil and did so much against the Muslims and against the Prophet ﷺ, they were the one who spread rumors about his wives and slanders and backbiting and so on and so forth. When their leader Abdullah ibn Ubay, when he passed away, when he died, the Prophet ﷺ went and he prayed his janazah. Went and he prayed his janazah. Why? Because he hoped that Allah may forgive him if he prayed his janazah. And the Prophet ﷺ in some narrations it said that he even took off his clothing, his top robe, and he put it over as a shroud on this man. All he did, this man, is try to harm the Prophet ﷺ. That's all he did in his life. Never a single time did he do anything else. But the Prophet ﷺ wanted to come and he wanted to still help him, because he wanted good for the people. And so the Prophet ﷺ, because he wanted good for people, he showed this in the principles that he used, he showed this in his character, he showed this in his dealings and in his interactions. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said to Ali radiallahu anhu, this is the point that we need to understand, that if Allah was to guide by you a single person, it would be better for you than all of the wealth of this world. Just one person is guided because of what you say, because of your dealings, because of your interactions, because of your mannerisms, then that is better for you than everything in this world. Only takes one positive interaction, one positive dealing for people to change their minds. Islam spread in parts of this world, in parts of this region, in places like Indonesia and Malaysia and so on, because of the character of the Muslims, because of their principles. Because when they would buy and trade, they wouldn't cheat, they wouldn't deceive, they wouldn't lie, they wouldn't sell fraudulent products. They would be people who would be honest, people who had integrity, people who in their dealings, others knew that they were honest people. And so people then became amazed by their character and it influenced them, and eventually that would lead them to Islam. You don't have to call people, you don't have to say anything, you don't have to even do anything. You just have to uphold yourself in a way that is befitting of a Muslim, in the way that Allah Azza wa Jal commands us to be, the way the Prophet ﷺ showed us that we should be. And when we do this, sometimes that is more than enough for the people to see your contribution, to see your mannerisms, to see your personality and character, and to be influenced by it. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives us good character, and that Allah Azza wa Jal gives us the strength to show the true image of Islam, and that Allah Azza wa Jal makes us good role models, not only for ourselves and our families, but for our communities as well. Jazakumullah khair for your patience and for listening. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi.
We'll have a quick Q&A session, inshallah, if that's okay with the Shaykh. Bismillah. So if you have any questions at all, hopefully with the topic, just put up your hand. I don't know if you're putting up your hand, you're clapping, but any questions at all, connected to the topic. I have questions, but I want to ask you guys first, please. They know how to call people to Islam, Shaykh. They don't need any more advice. So yeah, Bismillah. Anybody? Yes, brother.
Well, there is treating the father for his family.
Okay.
Sometimes he needs to slap the children, something. How about this in Islam?
Okay, so
Is it prohibited? Is it allowed? the father with his family.
Yeah, I think you mean disciplining your children?
Sometimes the daughter or something, and then he want to avoid something, but if he get nervous and then slap or steak or something like that.
Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ never hit anyone. He never hit his family, he never hit his children, he never hit his wives, he never hit his servants, anyone that was with him. In fact, forget hitting, he wouldn't even shout at them. He wouldn't rebuke them in a stern voice, he wouldn't call them names, he wouldn't swear at them, he wouldn't curse them. So all of the interactions with the Prophet ﷺ, if you look even outside of his family, companions, everything, he never used any type of violence. The most that he ever did was he would become angry. And people would know that he was upset and he would raise his voice. But even then he wouldn't go to the level where he's cursing, or where he's hitting, or where he's ridiculing. And so this is the best example. What we have to do, especially with our children, and especially when it comes to our religion, when it comes to trying to get them to come closer to Islam and so on, is we need to give them positive reinforcements. Right? We need to, and that doesn't mean that you don't discipline. There are other ways of disciplining rather than hitting. Right? Hitting is only one way of discipline, but there are other ways of discipline. You can, for example, take away from them rewards. You can take away from them things that they want. You can discipline them in other ways.
They refer to hadith that مروا أولادكم للصلاة لسبع
Yes.
عليها العشر.
Yes. So even this hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says that you should order your children to pray at the age of 7, the Prophet ﷺ himself never hit his children in doing so. What it means is from a young age you need to enforce within them, instill within them discipline. You see, the problem is, the difficulty comes is when we don't encourage our children from a young age to pray and to do things like this, and then when they get to the age of 10, 11, 12, and now it's more difficult to influence them, then we expect them all of a sudden one day to start praying, right? For example, I will give you an example. A child wants to pray at the age of 3 or 4. They don't know how to pray, they don't know how to make wudu, they don't know how to do anything. But what they do, children generally, naturally, from a young age, they like to imitate their parents. When their parents are praying, they want to pray like them. If you have a daughter, she will go and she will put on a scarf, right? Maybe it doesn't fit, she can't wear it, but she will do it anyway because she wants to pray. The father goes to the masjid, the child wants to go to the masjid as well. They want to go because they have just simply this thing that they want to be like their parents. We often, what we do is we say no to them. You don't need to pray, you don't need to do this, don't go to the masjid, you make too much noise, you mess around and so on. And we always say to them, no, 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 no. Then one day at 10, no, actually now yes. Change everything. Now do it. And so this psychological shift is the problem. And this is why I mentioned the Prophet ﷺ at a young age, he encouraged his children. So now you don't need to at the age of 10 hit them because they already understand, they're already praying, they already know, for example, what salah means, what are the words, what are the du'as that they're reading, what are the surahs that they're reading, they know the meaning and so on and so forth. It is about starting from a young age in the right way, so that you don't need to go to those levels of discipline. Whereas if you don't and then you start disciplining them later on, actually you will cause a negative effect. And you will probably drive them more away rather than bringing them closer. And Allah knows.
Anybody else? Sisters? No? Okay, Shaykh, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's kind of connected to what brother said as well. What's your advice to those people, who have family members or close relatives who may not be practicing Islam? What's the best way to give dawah to them? Where's the fine line that we sometimes feel, is that too much or is that too less?
I think there's no one way to call people to Islam, and for those of you that have done any form of da'wah, you will know that there is no standard one way of calling everyone. Each person has their own strengths and weaknesses, their own likes and dislikes, their own personalities, and you have to tailor each one to each situation accordingly. And that's why even the Prophet ﷺ, if you look at his da'wah techniques, he never called everyone in the same way. He didn't use the same approach to everyone. He would tailor it depending on the person. When it comes to family, you know your family best. If it's your brother, your sister, your aunt, your uncle, whoever it is, your relative, you know them better than other people. So you need to look at them. So for example, some people, all they need is a simple, positive kind of reinforcement. They need something positive to associate with Islam. Unfortunately, some of us, as young Muslims when we were growing up, all we took from Islam was beatings, right? We'd go to the teacher and he'd beat us. Our parents would beat us. You go learn Quran, the teacher beat. All there is beatings, beatings, beatings. And that's what we associate with Islam. Someone tells you read the Quran and you remember beatings. Someone tells you go and pray in the masjid and you remember beatings. And so now you have to change that perception, right? And this is like, it's a wider problem, but that's a different issue. So it's about changing that perception. Other people know it's an intellectual thing, right? They need a discussion. They need people to come and explain logically why this makes sense, why doesn't it make sense. And so you have to tackle that differently. Other people just want to see your mannerisms. I know people who, for example, when they started to practice Islam, because their character improved so much, their family became influenced by them. You have people, for example, before they would swear, curse, steal, lie, do all of these things, but then all of a sudden now they've changed. Not because they have a job or because they have some money or they became wealthy. It's because of Islam. They became better people. Their character was better. They started being honest. They were good. They were helpful. They were polite. They were well-mannered. And all of this. And so this is something which then influences other people. You yourself know best how to influence your family, but you need to look at also your own character and the way that you're dealing with them. And then you also need to look at what they need as well.
Anybody else? We have 5 more minutes. I've got questions, but again, I want to ask. I'm a teacher, so I love questions. So, but again, I would like to ask you first if you have any questions. Still no, huh? No? Yes, brother. Again, yes.
One more question.
Yes, please, please, please.
For the people who convert to Islam recently, they pray one time and maybe rest of the week they don't pray. Is it okay, but they should do help the people? I mean, their spouse, what they can do or something.
So I think the question is for people who newly revert to Islam, they become new Muslims. Maybe it's difficult for them to get into a routine of prayer and so on. How do you support them? What they need is, more than anything else, is they need support. Right? So you have to understand that for a new Muslim, it is a very big change to become a Muslim. One of the biggest, I think one of the biggest problems sometimes we have is when we have a new Muslim, they become a Muslim today, and tomorrow we give them a long list of do's and don'ts, right? Tick this, pray, fast, do this, dress like this, eat this, don't eat. And all of a sudden now, like you give them a whole long list of requirements. This isn't how people work. People don't work like this. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, if you look at the beginning of Islam, how did he bring people closer to Allah? Islam began by working on the heart, working on people's spiritual connections with Allah, working on people's iman. And once this was strong and it was solid, then everything else is much easier because people understand why they're doing it and they understand the benefits and they understand the spirituality that they take from it. This is also the same thing that we need to do with our new revert brothers and sisters. So we have to understand, yes, they will make mistakes. Yes, for example, they may not always pray all of their prayers. Yes, for example, they may find it difficult to follow certain things and not do certain things and so on. And often we teach new Muslims by assuming that they are like Muslims. And what I mean by that is because we take as Muslims, if you were born as a Muslim, you grew up as a Muslim, you take certain things for granted. That person doesn't take those things for granted. So you have to teach them in a very different way. And so it is an issue of support, I think, number one, and also number two, of understanding, and number three, working on that spiritual connection in the heart. And then inshallah, once you have done that, it will take time, and they will inshallah begin.
So be patient.
Yes, you have to be patient.
Last question, I think. Inshallah. Yes, brother.
If I have a family member who's not a Muslim, I tried to tell him to convert to Islam, and still I've tried many times, but still he doesn't want to. So he said he doesn't need to because he's very old, so I don't know what to do.
I think with family members, I think it's it can be tricky and it can be difficult. I don't think it's necessarily an issue of that you have to, for example, tell them, or that you have to have a conversation like that. I think what they need to see from you is more your character and your dealings and your interactions, and over time maybe speak to them in terms of the like an indirect conversation about Islam. So for example, you tell them about what you learned from the Quran, you tell them about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you tell them things indirectly that will hopefully inshallah bring them closer to Islam. Even the social things that we do, for example, what Islam does, a big thing that we don't focus on is the social aspects of Islam in terms of the care that we do for the elderly and for our neighbors and for the community, and all of these things that are part of Islam, because the Prophet ﷺ would spend a lot of time on this as well, in his community, the social aspects and social welfare and looking after others and so on. This is also a part of Islam, and this is something which people of all, it doesn't matter which religion you're from, which background, everyone understands this. Respecting others and helping others and looking after the poor, this is something which transcends all communities. So inshallah we'll try this, and inshallah and make dua for him.
Jazakallah khair. Anybody else? Sheikh, there's quite a number of youth here, alhamdulillah. So just final piece of advice for the young Muslims.
Honestly, the advice that I give to everyone, young, old, male, female, to everyone, is the same advice that I began this lecture with, and that is the importance of knowledge, of education. It is so important, especially for us as Muslims, for us to know our religion, because in the world today, the way that we live, with the online, the internet and Google and social media and even the normal media, all of the perceptions of Islam and all of this bombardment of information, the only way that you can sift between what is right and wrong, what is authentic and what is inauthentic, what is correct and incorrect, is through knowledge. Because otherwise you're just simply like a puppet being dragged from one side to another. You don't know. Someone tells you to do this and you do that, and someone else tells you the complete opposite, and you still don't know which one to do and which one not to do. And really the only way to break out of that bubble is to learn for yourself. It's for you to empower yourself through knowledge. And that's why Allah Azza wa Jal began Islam with the commandment of knowledge. Not everyone has wealth, right? We can't all be wealthy. Not everyone can, for example, reach academic heights. Not everyone will be a great professional. These are things that change from different people have at different times. But one thing that everyone can do is learn. Everyone can learn. Everyone can. It doesn't matter about your background, doesn't matter about your social ability, doesn't matter about your wealth. Everyone has access to knowledge and information. And when you learn and you have knowledge and you seek knowledge and you come closer to Allah through knowledge, not only do you know the difference between right and wrong, it gives you strength, gives you confidence, allows you to understand what you're doing in terms of your religion. And when people then come pushing you and pulling you in different ways and different directions, you know when to stop and say no, and you know when to say yes and to follow, because that's what knowledge does. And I think it's extremely important. So I know, in Hong Kong, your community is small, and alhamdulillah, you're developing and you're new, and you have, inshallah, a lot of exciting times ahead of you. But one of the things that you should always focus on is knowledge and learning amongst yourselves. And with the opening of YouTube and all of these platforms, knowledge is accessible now in more ways than ever before. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ actually, there's two very interesting signs of the Day of Judgment. Two interesting signs because they are complete contradictions. The first one is the Prophet ﷺ said that from the signs of the Day of Judgment is knowledge will be lost. Right? Knowledge, Islamic knowledge will be lifted, it will be lost. More and more Muslims know less and less about their religion. The second sign is that towards the Day of Judgment, people will be more educated. So the two don't make sense. We're more educated, we're more literate, we're more professional academically and so on, but at the same time we're more ignorant as well. How does that work? It's because we have more access, but we're less interested. So we have now things that we didn't have even 10, 15 years ago, with YouTube and with online studies and with all of these platforms that have opened up a whole world of information that you now have at your disposals from the comfort of your home. You don't even have to come to a masjid or a center or anywhere else. From the comfort of your home, from a mobile phone, from a tablet, you can access all of this. But at the same time, because of this, we're actually going further away. So we're wasting our time because we have access to so many new things. We're spending that time unwisely, wasting it, watching videos about just crazy things, right? People forward all sorts of silly things. So rather than learning about religion, we're watching a cat do a trick, right? Or watching someone not driving a car properly, or we're just wasting our time, and one video leads to another video, to another video, to another video, and before you know it, 3 hours is up, and all you did was watch videos. And so we're becoming diverted. We have to focus, right? We have to understand that yes, there's a time for messing around and so on, but there's a time also to be serious and to learn as well. So my best advice is learn and seek knowledge and educate yourselves, and through that you will come, inshallah, you will be stronger and you will be more confident, and you will also have more influence as well.
Jazakallah khair, Jazakallah khair. So brothers and sisters, we hope that this was enabled you to energize your iman. You know, the whole concept, the whole program is, you know, the center of attention is to energize our iman. And I don't know if some of you saw earlier this week, there was an article published where in America a lot of people are leaving Islam. And this is just a worldwide phenomenon. But there are people coming into Islam as well. So again, just to remind us again that, you know, Allah does not need us. You know, we need Allah. Allah does not need us. He can replace us like this. So there's a lot of things. I mean, atheism is growing in many communities, and sadly in our community as well, and sadly within our youth as well. Because our elders are there, they're just holding on to their tradition most of the time. But the youth are being bombarded, as the Sheikh said. So, you know, please do make use of this program and other programs, of course.
My Allah is the one, the one, the one, the one.